In the unforgiving Dakota Territory of 1869, a woman branded as barren by society makes the most desperate gamble of her life, proposing marriage to a wild mountain man, caged like an animal, and awaiting execution. What she doesn't expect is that saving his life might be the key to discovering her own worth. But will two broken souls running from their past find the courage to choose each other when freedom finally comes calling? Catherine Walsh's bare feet hit the cold wooden floor as thunder shook her small house in the Dakota Territory. The year 1869 had brought nothing but bad news, and this November morning felt no different. She pressed her ear against the bedroom door, listening to her husband William pack his bags in angry silence. "I'm leaving for my brother's farm." William's voice cut through the thin walls. "Doc Patterson says there's nothing wrong with me. The problem is you." Those words hit harder than his fists ever had. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of hoping, 3 years of monthly disappointment. The whole town of Millfield whispered the same cruel word behind her back. Barren. Like a field that couldn't grow crops, they said she was broken, useless. Catherine wrapped her thin shawl around her shoulders and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, the prairie grass bent low under the harsh wind. Gray clouds raced across the endless sky, promising another brutal winter. She touched her flat stomach and wondered what made some women blessed with children, while others got nothing but empty arms and pitying stares. The front door slammed shut. William's boots crunched across the frozen ground toward his waiting horse. He didn't look back, didn't wave goodbye. Just like that, her marriage was over. But something else caught her attention. Down the muddy main street, people were running toward the town square. Even old Mrs. Henderson was hurrying along, her walking stick tapping against the wooden sidewalk. Catherine had never seen the whole town move so fast. She pulled on her worn boots and thick coat, then stepped outside. The wind nearly knocked her over, but she pushed forward. Whatever was happening had to be more interesting than sitting alone in her empty house, counting all the things she'd lost. "They caught him!" young Tommy Miller shouted as he ran past. "They caught the wild man from Devil's Mountain." Catherine's heart started beating faster. Everyone in the territory had heard stories about the mountain man. Some said he was 7 feet tall, with claws instead of hands. Others claimed he could talk to wolves and bears. Most folks believed he was just a legend, a scary story parents told children to keep them from wandering too far into the wilderness. But apparently, the legend was real. As Catherine joined the crowd flowing toward the square, she heard bits and pieces of excited conversation. The sheriff had found him stealing horses near the canyon. He'd been living wild for almost 10 years. Nobody knew his real name or where he'd come from. The crowd grew thicker as they reached the town center. Catherine pushed between the pressed bodies, trying to get closer. Her heart pounded with a strange mix of fear and curiosity. After months of being the most whispered about person in Millfield, she was grateful that someone else had captured everyone's attention. What she saw next would change everything. The iron cage sat in the middle of the town square like a cruel joke. Inside, hunched on a wooden stool, was the largest man Catherine had ever seen. But he wasn't the monster from the stories. His dark hair hung past his shoulders, tangled and wild. But his face looked human, tired, sad even. "Step right up and see the beast of Devil's Mountain," Sheriff Patterson called out like this was some traveling circus show. "Caught him red-handed with Henderson's horses." The man in the cage lifted his head, and Catherine gasped. His eyes were deep brown, like rich soil after rain. When his gaze swept across the crowd, she saw something that made her chest tight. He looked trapped in a way she understood completely. "Hang him!" someone shouted from the back. "Wild animals don't deserve trials." "Now hold on." Patterson raised his hands. "Judge Morrison will be here tomorrow from Pierre. We'll do this proper." Catherine moved closer, pushing through the wall of people. The closer she got, the more she could see past the wild appearance. His hands, though dirty and scarred, were strong and careful as he gripped the iron bars. His clothes were rough but well mended. This wasn't a mindless beast. This was a man who'd been surviving alone, in impossible conditions. "What's his name?" she called out. Patterson squinted at her through the crowd. "Says he's Jeremiah Stone. Been living up in them mountains since he was barely more than a boy." Jeremiah Stone. The name felt important somehow, like a key she'd been searching for without knowing it. "Why were you stealing horses, mister?" little Amy Coleman asked, her small voice cutting through the adult chatter. Jeremiah looked down at the child, and his expression softened. "Horse threw a shoe up on the ridge. Winter's coming fast, and I needed to get down to warmer ground. Wasn't planning to keep them." His voice was rough from lack of use, but Catherine heard truth in it. This man wasn't a thief. He was trying to survive. "Liar!" Mr. Henderson pushed to the front, his face red with anger. "Those horses are worth more than most folks see in a year. You were going to sell them in Pierre." "I was going to return them once I reached the lower valley," Jeremiah said quietly. "Left my own horse as trade, until I could bring yours back." Catherine found herself stepping forward before she could stop herself. "Where's his horse now?" Henderson's face got redder. "Well, that don't matter none. He still stole mine. But if he left his horse, that's not stealing," Catherine pressed. "That's borrowing." The crowd murmured, some agreeing, others arguing. But Catherine wasn't listening anymore. She was studying Jeremiah Stone's face as he looked at her. For the first time since William had walked out, she felt something other than emptiness. "Don't matter what you call it," Patterson said firmly. "Taking someone's property without asking is against the law. Judge Morrison will decide his fate tomorrow." As the crowd began to break up, Catherine lingered. Jeremiah was still watching her, like he was trying to figure out why a stranger had spoken up for him. She wanted to say something more. But what? That she understood what it felt like to be judged by a whole town? That she knew how it felt when everyone expected the worst from you? Instead, she just nodded once before turning away. But an idea was already forming in her mind. Wild and desperate and completely impossible. Or maybe not impossible after all. Catherine's boots clicked against the wooden sidewalk as dawn broke over Millfield. Her heart beating so fast she thought it might burst. She carried a small basket of bread and apples, but her real purpose burned like fire in her chest, a plan so wild that even thinking about it made her hands shake. The jailhouse door creaked as Sheriff Patterson looked up from his morning coffee, his eyes going wide when he saw her. "Mrs. Walsh? What on earth brings you here so early?" "I need to speak with the prisoner," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's important." Through the iron bars, Jeremiah Stone sat on a narrow wooden bench, his dark hair falling across his face. When he looked up, she saw something in his brown eyes that reminded her of a wolf she'd once seen caught in a trap, dangerous, but also desperate. "Mr. Stone," Catherine began, then stopped. How could she possibly explain what she was about to ask? "Tomorrow, Judge Carver will decide your fate. Hanging, most likely," Jeremiah said quietly. His voice was deeper than she'd expected, rough from years in the mountains. "Not if you marry me." The words fell between them like stones dropped into still water. Sheriff Patterson's coffee cup clattered against his desk. Jeremiah's eyes never left her face. "You're already married," he said after a long moment. Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "William has agreed to end our marriage. The judge signed the papers yesterday." She took a shaky breath. "A married man has certain legal protections. I could ask for mercy, claim you as my husband." "Why?" Jeremiah stood up slowly, moving closer to the bars. "You don't know me. I know you're not ready to die," Catherine said. "And I know what it feels like to be trapped." She thought of all the whispered words, all the pitying looks, all the empty rooms in her house. "Everyone in town thinks I'm broken because I can't have babies. But maybe being broken isn't the end of everything." Jeremiah studied her face for what felt like forever. Behind them, Sheriff Patterson cleared his throat nervously. "What would you want from me?" Jeremiah asked. "Escape," Catherine said simply. From this town? From their whispers? From being the woman who failed at the one thing women are supposed to do? She wrapped her fingers around the cold iron bars. I have a little money saved. We could build a cabin at the edge of town, away from everyone. And if I run away the moment I'm free? Catherine had thought about this all night. Then I'll be no worse off than I am now. But I don't think you will. Why not? Because I think you're tired of running. Something shifted in Jeremiah's expression, like clouds moving away from the Sunday. He reached through the bars and touched her hand gently. His fingers were rough and warm. Marriage is a serious thing, he said. So is dying, Catherine replied. Sheriff Patterson stood up from his desk, shaking his head. This is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But Catherine kept looking at Jeremiah, waiting for his answer. Outside, she could hear the town waking up, horses clipping down the street, shopkeepers opening their doors. Soon the whole town would know what she'd done. There would be no taking it back. All right, Jeremiah said finally. I'll marry you, Catherine Walsh. But understand, this won't be like the fairy tales little girls dream about. I stopped believing in fairy tales a long time ago, Catherine said. Sometimes the best you can hope for is a chance to start over. The courthouse buzzed like a beehive as news of the strange wedding spread through Millfield faster than wildfire. Catherine stood at the front of the room in her best blue dress, the same one she'd worn to marry William 3 years ago, her hands trembling as Judge Carver looked over the hastily written papers. Beside her, Jeremiah wore clean clothes. The sheriff had found a white shirt and dark pants that were too short for his tall frame. His hands were still chained, but someone had washed his hair and trimmed his beard. He looked almost civilized, though his eyes kept darting toward the windows like he was measuring the distance to freedom. This is highly unusual, Judge Carver said, his gray whiskers twitching with disapproval. I've never seen a woman marry a condemned man. The law allows it, Your Honor, Catherine said, proud that her voice didn't shake. And given the circumstances, I ask for mercy. My husband was driven to desperate acts by hunger and loneliness. Surely 5 years of supervised work is punishment enough? Behind them, the townspeople whispered like rustling leaves. Catherine could feel their stares burning holes in her back. Mrs. Henderson from the dress shop had actually gasped when Catherine walked in. Even William was there, standing near the back with his arms crossed, looking like he'd tasted something sour. Judge Carver studied Jeremiah for a long moment. What do you say, Stone? Will you honor this marriage and remain in the territory? I give my word, Jeremiah said simply. Very well. By the power invested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife, Mr. Stone. Your sentence is commuted to 5 years of supervised release. You'll report to Sheriff Patterson monthly, and may not leave the territory boundaries. The judge's gavel banged like thunder. God help you both. As they walked out of the courthouse, Catherine felt every eye in Millfield following them. Someone actually spat in the dirt as they passed. But Jeremiah walked beside her with his head high, and when a small boy threw a rock that bounced off his shoulder, he just kept walking. The cabin that would be their new home sat a mile outside town, surrounded by tall grass that whispered in the wind. William had built it when they first married, dreaming of filling it with children's laughter. Now it would house a different kind of dream, one built on mutual need rather than love. It's not much, Catherine said as they stood in the doorway. The single room held a bed, a table, 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace. Windows on 2 sides let in afternoon light. I've slept under stars for 10 years, Jeremiah said. This looks like a palace. That first night, they arranged their sleeping carefully, Catherine in the bed, Jeremiah on blankets by the fire. The autumn wind rattled the windows and made the walls creak. Catherine lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering what she'd gotten herself into. Around midnight, thunder rumbled in the distance. Jeremiah sat up suddenly, his breathing quick and sharp. Storm coming, he said. Catherine watched him in the firelight. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly. Are you afraid of storms? In the mountains, storms mean avalanches, rock slides, I've seen men crushed by boulders bigger than this cabin." He ran his hands through his hair. "Stupid thing to fear." "I know." Catherine surprised herself by getting out of bed and sitting beside him on the floor. "Everyone's afraid of something. I'm afraid of empty rooms and pitying looks and growing old alone." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the thunder roll across the prairie. When lightning lit up the windows, Jeremiah flinched, but Catherine stayed beside him until the storm passed and morning light crept across the floor. "Thank you," he said quietly. "We're partners now," Catherine replied. "That's what partners do." 3 horsemen rode hard across the morning frost, their breath making white clouds in the cold air. Catherine dropped her water bucket when she saw them coming toward the cabin, her heart jumping like a scared rabbit. These weren't friendly visitors. Their faces looked mean, and guns hung from their belts like sleeping snakes ready to strike. "Jeremiah," she called, but he was already walking out of the barn. His shoulders were straight and strong, but she could tell he knew these men. The way he moved reminded her of a wolf getting ready to fight. The leader jumped down from his horse. He had a scar across his cheek that made him look even scarier. "Well, well, Stone. Living the quiet life now, are we? What do you want, Harrison?" Jeremiah's voice sounded calm, but Catherine saw his hands make fists. Harrison smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile a cat makes before it catches a mouse. "You know what we want. The gold from the Cassidy mine. $2,000 worth. Our boss wants it back. And he's not a patient man." Catherine's stomach felt sick. "Gold? What gold?" She looked at Jeremiah, but his face showed nothing. It was like looking at a stone wall. "I never took any gold," Jeremiah said. "I may have borrowed horses when I was hungry, but I'm not a thief." "Cassidy said different before he died." Harrison spat on the ground. "Said you came in the night like a ghost, killed him, and took his gold." The words hit Catherine like cold water. Murder? Her husband might be a killer, but then she looked at Jeremiah's eyes. They were sad, not mean. Tired, not angry. She had lived with him for months now. She knew what his hands felt like when he helped her with heavy things. They were gentle hands, not killing hands. "You're lying," she said, stepping forward. The words came out before she could stop them. All 3 men turned to look at her, surprised. Women weren't supposed to talk to men like this, but Catherine was tired of being quiet. "Ma'am, you don't know what you're talking about," Harrison said. His voice was sweet like honey, but his eyes were cold like winter ice. "I know my husband better than you do," Catherine said. Her voice shook a little, but she kept talking. "He was with me the whole week you're talking about, every single day. I can swear to that in front of any judge." It was a lie. She hadn't even met Jeremiah then. But sometimes lies were the only weapons a person had. Harrison's face got red. "You'd lie for this mountain rat?" "I'd tell the truth for an honest man," Catherine shot back. "Which is more than I can say for bounty hunters who chase innocent people for money." The 2 other men started to move their hands toward their guns. Catherine's heart beat so fast she thought it might jump right out of her chest. But Jeremiah stepped between them and her. "You've got no proof," he said quietly. "Just the word of a dead man who might have said anything when he was dying. That won't hold up in any court." Harrison looked angry enough to spit nails, but he also looked like he was thinking hard. After a long minute, he got back on his horse. "This isn't over, Stone. We'll be watching. And when we find that gold." He didn't finish, but his meaning was clear as glass. The 3 men rode away, leaving dust clouds behind them. Catherine stood there shaking, not from cold but from fear. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, what had she gotten Jeremiah into? Snow fell like white feathers outside their cabin window, and Catherine couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she made coffee. 2 weeks had passed since Harrison and his men rode away, but she still jumped every time she heard horses coming down the trail. Jeremiah sat by the fire, fixing a broken bridle. His big hands worked the leather like he was making something beautiful instead of just mending old horse gear. Catherine watched him, and wondered how those same hands could be accused of killing a man. "You're thinking loud again," Jeremiah said without looking up. It was something he said when she got quiet and worried. It always made her smile a little, even when she was scared. "Tell me about the gold," she said. The words hung in the air like smoke from the fire. Jeremiah's hands stopped moving. He looked at her with those deep brown eyes that reminded her of rich earth after rain. "What do you want to know? Did you take it?" The question was simple, but Catherine's whole world might change depending on his answer. "No." His voice was steady as a rock. "But I know who did." Catherine set down her coffee cup so hard, it made a loud clink. "What do you mean?" Jeremiah put down the bridle and rubbed his face with both hands. He looked older than his 32 years, like the mountains had aged him extra fast. "There was a man named Reynolds, mean as a rattlesnake and twice as quick. He followed me around for months in the mountains, always showing up at the wrong time, always asking questions about gold mines and rich claims. Why didn't you tell Harrison this? Because Reynolds disappeared about the same time Cassidy died, and because Harrison wouldn't believe me anyway. He needs someone to blame, and I'm easy to catch." Catherine moved closer to the fire. The warmth felt good on her face, but inside, she felt cold as January ice. "So what do? We wait. And we hope Reynolds turns up somewhere and tells the truth before Harrison decides to take the law into his own hands." That night, Catherine lay on her small bed, listening to Jeremiah breathe on the other side of the room. They had been living like brother and sister, sleeping apart, barely touching except by accident. But now she wanted to cross that space between them, not because she loved him, not yet anyway, but because she was scared, and he felt safe. "Jeremiah?" she whispered. "Yeah? If Harrison comes back, he won't hurt you, I promise." "That's not what I'm worried about." She turned over to face his direction, even though she couldn't see him in the dark. "I'm worried about what I'll do if he hurts you." Jeremiah was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then she heard him say, very softly, "Nobody's ever worried about me before." "Well, they should have," Catherine said. "You're worth worrying about." Outside, the wind made lonely sounds through the pine trees, but inside their cabin, something warm was growing between them. Something that had nothing to do with gold or bounty hunters or the law. Something that felt like the beginning of real love. Thunder rolled across the sky like angry drums as Catherine ran through the mud toward the barn. Inside, she found Jeremiah packing his few things into a worn leather bag. Her heart sank like a stone in deep water. "The sheriff brought news," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You're free to go anywhere you want." Jeremiah stopped packing and looked at her. Rain drummed on the barn roof above them. "I know. So you're leaving?" The words hurt to say. He walked to the barn door and stared out at the storm. Lightning lit up his face for just a moment. "For 10 years I lived alone in those mountains. I thought that was freedom." Catherine stepped closer. "What changed your mind?" "You did." He turned around, and his eyes looked different now. Softer, somehow. "You saved my life, but I think maybe I helped save yours too." The wind howled outside, shaking the barn walls. Catherine remembered all the nights they had sat by the fire, talking about their dreams and fears. All the mornings they had worked side by side in the garden. All the quiet moments when she felt like maybe she belonged somewhere. "I have something to tell you," Jeremiah said. His voice sounded nervous. "That gold the bounty hunters wanted? I know where it really island." Catherine's eyes grew wide. "What do you mean?" 3 months ago, when I was hunting near Devil's Canyon, I found a cave. Inside was a metal box filled with gold coins. I think someone hid it there during the war between the states." He pulled a small leather pouch from his pocket. "I took just enough to buy us supplies. The rest is still there." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Jeremiah looked down at his boots. "Because I was scared. If people knew I found that much gold, they might think I stole it. They might put me back in a cage." Catherine walked over and took his hands in hers. They were rough and strong like tree bark. "We could turn it in to the sheriff." Tell him we're at Island, that would prove you're honest. And then what? The town council would probably give us a reward. We could buy our own land, build a bigger house. He looked into her eyes. But only if you want to. Only if you choose to stay with me. Outside, the storm was getting worse. But inside the barn, Catherine felt warm for the first time in months. Jeremiah Stone, are you asking me to really marry you? Not because a judge said we had to, but because we want to? He squeezed her hands. I can't promise you children, Catherine, but I can promise you won't ever feel worthless again. Not while I'm here. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I choose you, too. Thunder crashed overhead, but neither of them was afraid anymore. 6 months later, Catherine woke up to the sound of baby Sarah crying. She smiled and got out of bed, walking to the small crib they had made from pine wood. The baby girl had come to them just 2 weeks ago, when her young mother died and her father couldn't care for her alone. Good morning, little one, Catherine whispered, picking up the baby. Through the window she could see Jeremiah chopping wood for their new neighbors, the Martinez family. They had arrived from Texas last month, looking for a fresh start after losing their farm to floods. Catherine carried Sarah to the kitchen, where fresh bread was cooling on the table. The smell made her stomach growl. She had learned to bake from Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house in town. In return, Catherine taught Mrs. Chen how to make medicine from prairie plants. Morning, my girls, Jeremiah said, coming through the door with an armload of wood. His beard was shorter now, and his eyes sparkled when he looked at them. Mr. Patterson stopped by yesterday, Catherine said, bouncing Sarah gently. He says 3 more families are coming next month. They need places to stay until they can build homes. Jeremiah grinned. Good thing we finished that extra room. He walked over and kissed Catherine's forehead, then made funny faces at baby Sarah until she giggled. Through the window, Catherine could see the town of Millfield in the distance. It looked bigger now, with new houses and shops. People still talked, but now they said different things. They called Jeremiah the mountain man who helps everyone, and Catherine the woman who knows how to heal. Remember when you first saw me in that cage? Jeremiah asked, sitting down at the table. Catherine laughed. You looked like a wild animal. I was terrified. What made you help me? She thought for a moment, rocking Sarah back and forth. I think I saw myself in you. Both of us trapped by things we couldn't control. Jeremiah nodded. The town council wants us to be the official welcoming committee for new families. Help them get settled, find work, learn the rules. What did you tell them? I said yes, but only if they pay us fairly, and only if we can help families who really need it, not just the ones with money. Catherine smiled. That sounded just like her husband, always thinking of others first. Baby Sarah fell asleep in Catherine's arms. Outside, she could hear children playing and adults calling to each other across their yards. The sound made her heart feel full. Do you ever miss the mountains? She asked Jeremiah. He looked out the window at the rolling prairie grass. Sometimes, but I found something better here. What's that? A home that I chose. People who need me. A wife who sees the good in me even when I can't see it myself. He reached over and touched Sarah's tiny hand. And maybe, if we're lucky, we'll get to watch this little one grow up. Catherine felt tears in her eyes again. But good tears. I never thought I'd be a mother. You are one now, Jeremiah said softly. Not because you gave birth, but because you love her like she's your own. As the sun climbed higher in the Dakota sky, Catherine realized something important. She had spent so many years feeling broken because she couldn't have children. But now she understood that families came in all shapes and sizes. Love didn't have to come from blood. It could come from choice. Outside, the prairie stretched on forever, golden and beautiful. And inside their little house, 3 hearts beat together like a song of home.